Welcome to This Explainer. Okay, we're just going to dive right in today because we've got a seriously fascinating topic to cover, the evolution of music. But we're not just looking at it as entertainment or something you put on in the background. No, we're actually going to trace the harmonic path of music as a real, dynamic medical tool. We'll be looking at everything from its roots in ancient antiquity right up to the absolute cutting edge of modern neuroscience.
So think about it. Is music just a form of art, or is it actually a powerful medicine capable of physically healing the body and completely rewiring the brain? Now, we all know that blasting a favorite song can completely flip your mood, right? But what if I told you that specific rhythmic sounds can literally help Parkinson's patients walk again? Or that the right melody can actually lower your blood pressure and drop your cortisol levels? We're going on an incredible journey today, and it's definitely going to challenge everything you thought you knew about the tunes you stream every single day. But to truly understand where we are today, we gotta look back, and I mean way back.
Section 1. Music as Ancient Medicine.
You see, music therapy is incredibly deeply ingrained in human history. It is definitely not some new age trend. Just look at antiquity. In ancient Egypt, priests at the Abydos Temple, which was basically the biggest medical center of its time, used vocal chants as a primary treatment for diseases. They genuinely believed music was medicine for the soul. Then, if we jump to the 5th century BC, you've got the Greek philosopher Pythagoras literally prescribing stringed instruments to try and cure plagues in Sparta. I mean, talk about an unconventional doctor's visit, right? Fast forward a bit more to the 5th century AD in Cairo. Over at the Kalalawan Hospital, patients dealing with melancholy were actually put into specialized, isolated single rooms just so they could listen to therapeutic music and watch dancing plays. They were literally designing clinical architecture around music over 1,000 years ago. And the wild part is, the ancients didn't just play any random music. They were incredibly specific about what they used. The philosopher Plato actually wrote out musical prescriptions, categorizing different instruments by their direct psychological effects. So on one side, you had the lyre, which is a plucked string instrument. Plato argued this produced very orderly, soul-inspiring music that could actually teach morality and law. But then on the flip side was the aulos, a reed-blown pipe. This was prescribed for totally different conditions and was meant to evoke this very intimate, cathartic, and even orgiastic emotional release. They were essentially matching the pharmacological profile of an instrument to a patient's exact symptoms. It's just mind-blowing.
So why did they think all this actually worked? Well, it all came down to balance. The main medical theory in ancient Greece was the four humors. This idea that human health relied entirely on the perfect balance of four bodily fluids. If you were sick, it was simply an imbalance, period. Well, Pythagoras took this a step further and focused on the physics of music. He firmly believed the harmonic overtone ratios found in music perfectly paralleled the mathematical perfection of the universe itself. So, by playing specific harmonic frequencies, he thought he could physically vibrate a sick person's body right back into its natural, healthy, humoral balance. And, while that sounds a bit out there today, modern science is actually validating what those Egyptian priests and Greek philosophers suspected all along.
Which brings us to Section 2. The neuroscience of music. Because guys, it's not magic. It's pure neurobiology. When we look at the actual mechanisms of action, one of the absolutely most fascinating concepts is neural entrainment. This is when rhythmic stimuli literally synchronize with your brain's own neural oscillations. It acts like a bridge, connecting your auditory system straight to your motor system. But that's not all. Music also heavily engages your deep reward and memory circuits. We're talking the prefrontal cortex, the hippocampus, and the amygdala. It's basically a full brain workout that can actually stimulate structural neuroplasticity. Now, in actual clinical settings today, this science gets applied in two very distinct ways. And it's really vital to understand the difference between active and receptive music therapy. So active music therapy is exactly what it sounds like. It requires participatory engagement. This means the patient is physically singing, playing an instrument, or improvising. And it's highly effective for stimulating memory, communication, and motor activity. Receptive music therapy, on the other hand, is all about guided listening. It's carefully curated by a therapist to induce deep relaxation, regulate mood, or maybe spark autobiographical reminiscence. Both are very real clinical interventions, but they trigger entirely different neurological pathways depending on exactly what that specific patient needs. Let's look at some hard data on how this actually affects the physical body, because this is where it gets real. In a landmark 1985 study over in Egypt by Dr. Youssef, researchers looked at the physiological impact of music on patients with organic disorders. And what they found was that highly curated sedative music didn't just make people vaguely feel calmer. No, it caused a massive, highly measurable drop in blood pressure and heart rate. But the most incredible part? It dropped the ratio of cortisone, which is the primary stress hormone in your blood, down to exactly 5.6 milligrams per 100 cubic centimeters. That is huge. It proved definitively that music triggers a profound, measurable biochemical cascade in the human body. So knowing that music physically alters brain structure and blood chemistry, how exactly is the medical field using this superpower today?
Let's get into Section 3, Modern Clinical Applications. We really need to see how all this science builds into Alzheimer's and dementia care, because honestly, this is where the evidence for music therapy is currently the absolute strongest. Alzheimer's is a devastating disease, primarily because of the widespread cortical atrophy it causes, which just wipes out language and executive function. But what is absolutely miraculous is that the brain regions responsible for processing music, like the basal ganglia and the supplementary motor area, well, they often remain functionally intact, even in the very, very advanced stages of the disease. Procedural and semantic musical memories somehow survive the damage. This means that long after a patient has lost the ability to speak or even recognize a close loved one, they can still actively engage with and find genuine joy in familiar music.
And the clinical applications today are incredibly broad. Take dementia, for example. Music therapy sparks real autobiographical recall and significantly reduces behavioral agitation. For Parkinson's disease, therapists use a technique called rhythmic auditory stimulation. Because of that neural entrainment we talked about earlier, the beat of the music acts as a physical auditory cue that actually bypasses damaged basal ganglia pathways. This dramatically improves a patient's stride length, balance, and seriously reduces freezing episodes. Then you have stroke patients, where music stimulates the exact neuroplasticity required to recover verbal memory and upper extremity motor function. Even in schizophrenia, adjunct music therapy has been clinically shown to reduce negative symptoms, anger, and depression, all while enhancing social functioning. We're talking highly targeted, powerful rehabilitation here.
But, we can't just look at the patients in isolation. We have to zoom out and look at the entire care ecosystem. Group music therapy has a massive psychosocial impact. Did you know that singing in a group actually elevates your oxytocin levels? That's the bonding hormone. It heavily mitigates the deep loneliness that's often felt in long-term care facilities. And crucially, it provides massive, much-needed relief for the caregivers themselves. When verbal communication with a loved one declines, sharing a musical experience provides this beautiful new medium for engagement. It actively reduces the caregiver's own anxiety, stress, and workload. So, if music therapy is this effective, affordable, and safe, why isn't it just an absolute standard in every single hospital around the world? Well, like everything in healthcare, it's pretty complicated.
That brings us to Section 4, Ethics and Healthcare Policy.
We absolutely have to address a very serious ethical reality in this field. The sources point out that musical interventions can unintentionally evoke traumatic or confusing memories, trigger overstimulation, or feel intrusive. We all have this common assumption that music is universally soothing, right? Well, it is not. A seemingly benign, happy song might carry deeply painful personal associations for a specific patient. And if a patient has severe dementia and literally cannot verbally consent, playing the wrong music can cause severe agitation and real harm. This right here is exactly why trained, board-certified music therapists are so essential. You can't just press play on a streaming playlist. Cultural sensitivity, closely observing nonverbal cues, and securing informed consent are absolutely mandatory.
Beyond those clinical ethics, there are some massive structural roadblocks preventing widespread adoption right now. For starters, we are facing severe workforce shortages. There simply aren't enough highly trained music therapists for our rapidly aging global population. Combine that with inconsistent licensing credentials from country to country and a real lack of standardized research reporting, and you can see why it becomes very hard to regulate. But perhaps the biggest hurdle of all, incredibly limited insurance reimbursement frameworks. In so many places, music therapy completely relies on charity or short-term grants, simply because healthcare payers don't formally recognize it as a reimbursable medical service.
So how do we actually fix this? Well, researchers and policymakers have outlined a really clear, vital path to legitimize this field globally. First, we have to start by implementing standardized reporting, like the RGMBI guidelines, so every single clinical study is speaking the exact same language. From there, governments and insurers absolutely must expand national reimbursement frameworks to fund this, just like they would physical therapy. We also need to get these referrals embedded directly into electronic health records. That way doctors can just prescribe it with a simple click. And finally, we have to leverage telehealth and hybrid models so we can actually reach underserved rural or mobility-restricted populations. Wow, okay, we have covered a tremendous amount of ground in this explainer today, haven't we? We went all the way from the chanting priests of ancient Egypt to the neural entrainment of modern stroke rehabilitation. But before we wrap up, I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. As non-pharmacological medicine rapidly advances, how will your own daily relationship with music shape your cognitive health in the future? Think about it. The songs you're listening to today might just be the medicine that preserves your memory tomorrow. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey. Keep listening, keep learning, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.